let's just look at what a Mobius strip is. That is a ordinary piece of light card. It's got printing on one side and some of it's got bits of my writing on the other. What I'm going to do, normally if you put it into a circle you get that, but what I'm going to do is twist that end round like that. So that is a half twist. And then we'll put some sellotape over it to keep it from falling apart. Now, what you've got here, if we start at the join and go round, we're on the printed side, and we go round and we keep on going, and we're on the other side. You can do this at home with a piece of any piece of paper and a pen, and you can see a Mobius strip is all one side. That's printed side. And now we're on the, what was the back of the ordinary piece. And now we're on the front again. And with a Mobius, you will always somewhere have that half twist in what you're doing. And that, of course, as I said before, is what we've got here. This is bits here is the equivalent of the where the paper is, and here we're using that twist as a design feature. Right, going back to the other 6 skeins in the set, you can see I've already wound one. These I'm going to use to make a Mobius cowl. Now here's one that I've made in 4-ply. A Mobius strip is a mathematical oddity which is great fun. You get a half twist in a piece of paper or whatever, and as a result you have no front or back, they're both the same. Now in knitting, what happens when you do the Mobius cast on, it's in the middle here, along there, and you're working out from both sides at once. And you can see how well this works with the different colours. So you cast on, which becomes the very centre, and then you gradually work outward, going round and round and round. And this is what you end up with. Now, you can also see that with a Mobius, one half going out that way is one side of the work, and the other is the other side of the work. Betty Martin is a particularly good pattern for this because, as I'm sure you've realised by now, it has different but both good patterns on the front and the back. So it's ideal where you're wanting both sides to show. So that's what a Mobius looks like in the end. The key is the cast on, which we'll look at later. Coming back to the colours, because I'm working from the centre out, I have decided I want the outer one to be dark, so light in the centre, dark on the edge. Those three are definitely in that line. That one is definitely there, and this is all because of the colours being picked up. The only question is whether I put it that way round or that way round, and in the end I think I've decided that it's going to be better with that one on the edge. I may yet change my mind, we'll see. Now, as I said before, to make a Mobius strip, the cast on is critical. I'm going to warn you now, this can be physically hard work, and until you've got the idea, it can be a bit tricky. It's not difficult, but it can be a bit tricky. Now, the first thing you want to do is take the needles in each hand, and usually you'll find that the cord forms a loop like that. And you can see there, this one on this occasion is going up over the top, round, and then underneath for the second one. It doesn't matter which one of these two needles is on top. The important thing is that you have a loop like that. The next thing you do is you pick up the loop and hold it in the hand you're going to cast on with. Now, I've already made a slip knot at the beginning there. Now, what you're going to do now is you're going to take the yarn under, you're going to take the yarn underneath, scoop up a stitch, yarn underneath, scoop up a stitch, yarn underneath, scoop up a stitch, yarn underneath, scoop up a stitch. Now, when you get good at it, you just sort of go like this forever and ever, amen. It's really quite straightforward. But there are a couple of things I'll note here. If you want a nice neat cast on in the middle of your cowl, you need to do this fairly tightly, not tightly but not loosely, which means that later on it's going to be quite hard to push these along the cable and the needle, but that's the way it is. Now, I've got the yarn over that finger there, and so what I'm basically doing is I'm just twisting my wrists and scooping, and as I twist my wrists, you see how the yarn is lying just dead right to be scooped up. And then that is what you end up with at this point. Now, one other thing to notice here, every time you scoop round the end of the needle, it's one stitch. Every time you scoop round the cable, you ignore it. So for the size I'm doing, I need 160 stitches, so I need 160 stitches on the needle, and I will have another 160 back here. Okay, so the number of stitches isn't the total number, it's the number on the working needle. Now, it can be quite tricky keeping track of how many you've got, and you can, if you feel like it, just pop markers in every 50 or something when you're doing these. The other thing is it's quite easy to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just count as you do it. Right, now those are slipping there quite nicely. Later on we'll have a little bit of problems, but never mind. So what I'm going to do now is just continue until I've got 160 stitches on the needle. I've now got the right number of stitches, that is on the needle. I've pulled them round because you're going to want to start knitting with the first stitch you cast on. Now this is where, as you can see, it gets a little tricky, not difficult, there is a difference, pulling these round. You can also see at this point, somewhere in the loop, you're going to get that crossover. And the crossover at the moment is round about there. It doesn't matter where it is, it can be right up here, anywhere else. But you're going to have a crossover somewhere, and it's there. Now then, just before we start, I'm going to put in a stitch marker to show the end and beginning of the round. The first stitch can be quite tricky, and this isn't something you can do fast. After you've done 2 or 3 stitches, then you can pull the ones from the receiving needle round. Once you've got started, we can get technical. You will see that there are 2 ways that the stitches on the needle project. The first one is going towards me on my side or the front of the needle, and if the stitch is at the front, you knit it from the front. The next stitch you will see is behind. It's going the other way, it looks obvious, and you use the back. So you're doing back with the ones that are at the back, behind the cable. Sorry, my hands are a bit shaky this morning. And front for the others. You can see already that it looks as though there's some sort of spare yarn. That is because the stitches on the cable are pulling up tight. There's nothing you can do about this, it will sort itself out later. So just carry on regardless. And as I said, this becomes quite tricky, manoeuvring the stitches. Once the first row is done, there's no problems, but it is a bit tricky at this point. So take it slowly. Front, the next one's back, the next one's front, next one's back. And just continue this. I'm deliberately trying to keep my hands and tips close together because that minimises the amount of stretching that you get. So try and keep your hands really close. Front, back, front, back, front, back. And then every few stitches, pull it round. You can see how these are going more easily already. Sometimes you find that the cable twist tries to come up into the needle bit, and get rid of it, get it back down into the cable. That's where you want it, because that's where it's easiest to deal with. And you just carry on going all the way around to the end. Now you see I've got quite a way round, and that's where the twist is at the moment. And you can see here where it becomes tricky to push the stitches over the join. This is why it's important to use circulars with a good join. If you've got ones that catch, you'll be in trouble. I'm using Signature Art SIGs, as people know them, and they have a very good join, very easy join, but even so you can see it's quite hard work pushing them up. As I say, once the first row has been done, we don't have problems anymore. But do just watch that, and there's nothing wrong if you find you're having trouble doing that. It means you've done it right. If you've done it too loosely, it's not the end of the world, by the way, we can sort that later. But if you've got good joins, it makes it easier. Now, as you go round, you may well find, if I can get this in the right place, you may well find that you get a long piece of cable there tending to pull the cast on row. Simply, if you do this, simply what you do is hold the receiving needle and just pull the cable until the two tips are ready again. So all you need to do is pull the cable, and you can see how that's just disappeared. As I say, this is not difficult, but it is tricky. There is a big difference between the two. So if the yarn is in front of the needle, it's knitted normally through the front of the stitch, and if it's at the back of the needle, it's into the back of the stitch. It's just the way you always, on plenty of other occasions, you find what it may well say in instructions is knit or knit through the back of the stitch, depending on how the stitch presents. Right, now then, you can see I've come back to where I started this first row, right? But can you see I have not come back to where the stitch marker will come off. You can see instead of being on the needles, it's now on the cable. And what we've actually done is we've now knitted all the stitches on the needle, and what we're now going to do is another half of the round to knit the ones that were on the cable. You'll see already that now they're much easier to move round. So once you've got that first round done, they're much, much easier to move. On this too, you may find that it's easier to do the front and back of the stitches. Some people do, some people don't. It's less of an issue on this round, but I do. You can see that when it's at the front, I do it at the front. When it's at the back, I do it at the back. Everybody has their own favourite needles. What I would say is, I know a lot will disagree, but beware ones with a cable that comes apart, one of the sets, because they can come apart when you don't want them to. I also find, especially for something like this, however supposedly smooth the joins are, I find them very tricky on that very first row. So I just have to keep going all the way around, and the pattern says we start off with 2 knit rows. So what I'll do now is I'll carry on, finish this knit round, and then do another knit round, and then we'll begin to look at it. You can see how much more easily things are slipping now. No problem at all. You can see now that I'm almost back, a couple more stitches, and I'm back at the start of a round. I've knitted 2 rounds. Now you can already see there, I think, that on the side I'm working on, it looks just like knit stitches. On the opposite side, where the cable is, they're purl stitches. Now, the next thing I need to do is to start the pattern. And the pattern is, let's finish that round. Right, the pattern is knit 2, purl 2, etc. Now then, you just continue doing the same thing all the way round until you've got what I reckon about 30-40 stitches left to go, at which point you can see how many stitches you've got left. Now, the thing about a Mobius cast on is very often you actually cast on a few more or less than you want. With a 4-stitch pattern, you've got 3 options. Either it's going to be okay, it'll be divisible by 4, no problems. Or there'll be 1 more or 1 less, and that's the same problem, if you think about it. Or there's 2 more or 2 less. So the maximum number you're going to need to adjust is 2, right? So if you've got 3 left over, you need to increase 1. If you've got 2 left over, you need to increase 2. If you've got 3 left over, then basically you've got 4, and therefore you just need to increase the 1 again. I do that, I start thinking about it about that far out from the start, because if I need to increase, I do one sort of there and one there, just wherever. Nobody will notice it. If your pattern has got more than 4 stitches, you may need to do this on an earlier round. But basically, I like to get the cast on done and dusted and then do the count. Right, here I am, nearly finished the first pattern row. That is the end of the pattern row. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17. That means 1 more. 16 is divisible by 4, so somewhere along here I just need to work 2 together, and in fact I'm going to do it straight away. I'll do that. Yes, I'm on a pair of knits there, and that now will mean I'm right. And at this point you just keep going until you finish. When you've finished with one ball, then you can bring in the next one, and so on, until you either have the width you want or you run out of yarn. It doesn't matter. Right, I've now done 3 complete colours, 1, 2, 3, and I'm on the 4th. You can see too where the cast on was, just along here. If you look very closely, you will see the occasional stitch like here. Can you see? That's where the stitches got a bit loose on the when I was doing the first round. Nobody will see them once the thing's in wear. Now, a couple of things to notice. first of all, you can see now how the one side is on the right side and the other side is on the other side. So you've got mainly pearls on this side, mainly knits on that side. It's very noticeable when you have the thing on, just because of the way the light will catch the different stitches, and it can look really good. One other thing at this point is where I'm changing the colours. At the moment, all I am doing is knotting them loosely, and I'm not starting them or stopping them at any one point, because a Mobius doesn't have a start and a finish. So what I'll do later on is undo the knot and run them through for a couple of inches. If you've got superwash that's going to be washed, then you need to weave the colours through for at least 2 inches, 5 centimetres, at least that. Otherwise they will gradually come loose. They always wish to be seen. Another thing you might notice is that the stitches are quite crowded on parts of the needle. Now, when you're doing a long Mobius cowl like this one is, that's going to happen. It just means you've got an awful lot of twisting the stitches round. If you have too long a cable, then the first bit is particularly difficult. I tend to use round about 90 centimetre, 36 inch cables, or needle length in total, that type of thing. Sometimes you'll want something a bit longer or a bit shorter, but basically don't worry over much about what the length of your cable is. You can see here, these are the last two skeins that I'm going to use. You can see the silver quite nicely on that. I'm going to do this one first, and then on this one I'm going to do the last 2 or 3 rounds plus a special cast off. We'll look at that later. Well, that's now finished the actual knitting of the cowl. I'm on the last colour, and I've got about 2 rounds worth of yarn left. You need that amount for the cast off we're doing. You can, if you like, cast off in any other way. You don't have to use the fancy one. What I'm doing now, I've just come to the end of the last row. I've already taken away the marker. I've taken that off the needle, so that can go. Now, the cast off I've suggested is one that gives you little sort of lumpy bits, and it's just cast on 2 stitches and then cast off 4. So you're casting off the 2 you've already done plus 2 from the needle. So that's the first little blob done. Put the stitch back on the working needle, the full needle, cast on 2 more, and now cast off 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you see the nubs beginning to form? That's the first 2 ones. Now, as I say, you don't have to use this cast off. I just think it gives a slightly interesting cast off. Now you just carry on like this all the way around. And here is the final cowl, all cast off, all ends carefully woven in. Now you'll see that it sort of sits like that. Depending on how you want to wear it, you can make that crossover be much closer round the neck, or you can make it much wider. The choice is yours. You'll see better than that with the flat photos. One or two things I'd like to point out here. You can see now very clearly where the cast on was. The cast on was here, and you can see the colours going all the way out. And you can see that this first colour actually pooled quite a bit, but I think it looks good like that. Everybody has their own opinions on pooling, but I think it can look really good. And you can see here too, that's one side of the knitting and that's the other side. They are not the same, but they are both equally nice to look at. Just one more thing. If you were really looking hard, you might have seen, let me put it round, put it down, that parts of the cast off are all navy and part have navy in them but other colours. Somewhere or other, here we are, that's where the thing is. Now that was because I ran out of yarn there. Now you can see I'm not very far from the end. I'd done piles of this. Pulling it back is an absolute pain, and I've just thought, right, let's use an odd bit I've got of Karina's DK, and again, because it's the same colours being used, the same dyes, then it looks fine. Tomorrow when Jenny's here, we'll get some still photos and you'll be able to look at it more closely, but that's then the cowl. So with that set of 20 grams, I've made a cowl, fingerless mittens and a hat, and I've just used a few bits of other yarns from my stash.